Thank you. Okay, I'm Julia Pasciuto. I use she and her pronouns. I am the EDI fund manager, and I'm joined today by my uh, colleagues. I'll pass it to you, Dakota.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dakota Murray. I use she, her pronouns, and I will pass it to Michelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Oon, and I am a PM here in the EDI team. I use she, her pronouns as well. Nice to see you all. Back over to you, Julia.
And I think that's everyone else from our. And I'm getting a little feedback. If folks can turn their mics off, that'd be great. Dakota, are you ready to share screen?
Yep, I can do that. 1 second.
So welcome to the 2024 EDI RFP info session. Are you sharing, Dakota?
Here we go. Sorry.
Okay.
Let me know if you see it.
Oh, I see it. Yeah.
Perfect. Fantastic.
Next slide. Be giving a brief presentation today, and then hopefully leaving a lot of time for your questions. The objectives for this presentation are to clarify the RFP objectives, communicate the timeline and eligibility, work through the budget attachments. We have at least one new budget attachment that we're requiring, and then to make sure that all applicants understand the evaluation rubric and review process. Next slide. A couple of important pieces of context that we wanted to make sure that we shared today. We have, in the last handful of years, experienced really significant growth in the number of projects that we're supporting, and also in our budget. Since 2021, our budget has almost quadrupled, and we're still trying to adjust what our program looks like and how we respond to both the need of our current grantees and the need of the potential future grantees. We also have a small staff team that has experienced a lot of change in the last couple of months. This year, we are experiencing a condensed timeline due to the restrictions on getting money out the door as a result of the budget shortfall. And if you've been following EDI over the last couple of months, you've seen that there were some questions about from City Council about why is it that we continue to carry forward 20, 30, $50 million this last year from year to year. And while we know that, the important purpose for EDI is to be patient with our dollars, we also know that there are a significant number of projects that, if not for a little extra boost of funds, whether it's because of stuckness that they're experiencing, timeline delay or cost escalation. We know costs have increased a lot in the last couple of years, that we want to make sure that we're prioritizing those projects that can get done to get done. And as a part of the inquiry that council had, we did a survey with 80% of our grantees responding, and half of those who responded said that their project would be done by 2025. And 10% in addition to that by the end of 2026. And all of our respondents to the survey said that they're requesting almost $70 million from EDI in future award cycles. So we know that there's a need for our current grantees, and we know that the projects can get to completion, and we want to help them get there. Next slide. This year, we have a total of $22 million to award. We have set a cap of $3.5 million for acquisition and construction asks, and we're requesting that you include any pre-development asks in those acquisition or construction requests. And then we'll also fund up to 2 years of capacity building. So our current limit is $75,000 annually. And anybody who is successful in receiving funds through this RFP will automatically get capacity building. But you do need to apply for capacity building. You won't automatically get it if you're a current RFP or if you're a current recipient of EDI funds. The other new thing this year, we have a new online portal. You can find the link on our website, as well as a application, how to log in to the new online funding portal. And please let us know if you have any questions or are having any challenges with that, because it's new to us as well. Dakota?
Right, thanks, Julia. So I'm just going to walk through kind of what the funding would look like depending on how we spread the funds or how people apply. So we want to reiterate that you want to ask for what you're needing, specifically focusing on what you can accomplish in the next 2 years. So that's 2025 and 2026 after being funded. Say we were to fund at the full capacity ask and the full capital ask of 3.5 million, that would take us to about 6 projects minimum. If we were to fund at that full ask. If per se you were going to apply for more like $1 million, then that would give us a spread more of maybe 14 projects. And then we just want to reiterate that you want to align your capacity ask with the timeline of your capital ask. So if you think that your project will be completed in 2025, or you think that you will be at least to the next phase in 2025, and you don't foresee any need for funding for capital or capacity building funding in 2026, then you would just apply for one round of capacity building funding, that's 75,000, versus if you think that your project will take the next 2 years, then you would apply for both capacity building fund rounds. And I'm going to talk about some eligibility criteria here. So for existing EDI awardees, that's what Julia had already kind of said, that if you have received an award letter, you don't have to be under contract yet. You just have to have already been awarded through one of the previous EDI processes. If you are an active project, so that means that you're not in the permanent operations phase, which means that you have work that you're still completing on your project with EDI within your original scope. And for some projects, they could be in an interim phase where they're still in that 5-year period where they're completing their project, but they are providing some services. That would still be eligible. But if you're at the end of that 5-year period and you've already completed the scope of work that you've set out to do, then you would not be eligible for this round of funding. You would look out for future rounds of funding where it would be back to being open, or if you had new projects that you wanted to apply for, that would be future rounds of funding. You cannot apply for any significant expansion of your scope. So again, we're looking to what you were previously awarded for and kind of what that scope of work is. And you really want to be able to demonstrate that you can spend this funds down by 2025 or 2026 and be accelerating towards either completion or to the next phase of your project. So I'm going to go over the timeline. Right now, we're in the period where the RFP is open. We've got just under a month left for it to be open. And this is also the time where you can request meetings with your project manager for EDI for more information. And we're in the first of 2 info sessions. And I believe the next one is on the 24th. And you can go ahead during that time and ask any questions that you have, and make sure that you get those questions in before November 4th or on November 4th. And we plan to have answers posted on our website on the 7th. That just kind of gives everybody equitable access to all of the questions that have been asked, essentially. The applications are due on November 19th at 11:59 p.m. So we just want to make sure we get them in by then. And this staff review process, it's staff review versus our original processes, which have been community and board review, because we're doing a compressed timeline. But I did want to note that all of these projects have previously gone through that competitive process with the community and board review. So they've already been vetted essentially and deemed worthy by being awarded. Then we'll go through the process where the recommendations are finalized by the board and through the mayor's office. And we're hoping to have our announcements before mid-January, and if we have any better clarification on when that'll be, we'll let you know as soon as we know. All right. Okay, now I'm going to walk through the required attachments for the application. So as we've done before, you'll want your articles of incorporation or your fiscal sponsorship letter. And there will be questions in the application that specifically ask for these documents, so you'll know when to submit them. And then for capacity building, if you're planning on applying for capacity building, you'll want to do your budget and work plan, which is also available on our EDI website right now as a template. And in the question itself, it'll link directly to that so that you'll have access to it. And same for capital, you'll want your sources and uses budget, quarterly cash flow, which Michelle will go over in the next slide, and your work plan. These things are all also available online on our templates. And I did want to note one thing when you're doing your application, and it should say it in the question, when you're uploading your file, you'll just want to make sure in the upload file box that there's a little button right there that clicks that instead of saying supported files, you'll click all files, and then it'll show you your Excel sheet, basically because it's an Excel sheet, but it'll walk through it on the question as well. It's just something that came up when we were figuring out how to do in this new application portal. But if you have any questions on that, definitely email us and let us know. And you also just want to submit any optional documents that are going.
Dakota, can you slow down a little bit? There's new information for a lot of people, and so it's just.
Yep, sorry.
Let's and then we can pause at the end of each slide and ask if folks have a question. We can address it before they lose their question. Thanks very much.
Yeah, of course. Okay, well, the other thing that I was just going to say is any other documents that you have that you think are going to support showing how you spend down your funds, feel free to submit those documents. I think we've got 3 additional document upload spaces for capacity building and for capital for you to just demonstrate further what you think we need to know, basically. And I can't see the chat right this second, but I think I did see a question come in. Was that related to this?
It's just asking if we could slow down, but we could ask if there's any questions thus far, folks.
Yeah, I'll stop here.
And we only have a few more slides. So, Michelle, do you want to walk through the quarterly cash flow?
Yes, let's do it. All right. Okay. Thanks, Dakota and Julia. And I will ask for other folks on the team to jump in as needed to clarify or add any context. What you're seeing here is the template, an example of our cash flow projection document. So in one of those documents that you'll be able to download that Dakota mentioned, there'll be a budget, a sources and uses budget file, and there'll be 3 tabs on that. So that first tab will be the budget. And many of you are probably familiar with this. You've probably been putting that type of budget together as you're planning and thinking about your project. Your uses are the budget, the total amount that you'll need to complete your project. And then the sources, you'll see a few example columns. Those will include your existing EDI award, the unspent portion, and then there's a column for the new request as well. And then there are other columns for you to use for your other sources to go towards the project. And then that next tab that you'll see will be the cash flow template. So that will lead you to this document here. And as Dakota mentioned, this is going to be a quarterly cash flow over the course of 2 years. The goal for us is to see how you plan to spend down your EDI award over the course of the next 2 years to get you to operations or through major project milestones and into the next project phase. So that first column that you see where it says acquisition cost subtotal, those are all of the summarized categories. In the budget file itself, you'll see there are a lot more line items for you to use as applicable to your project. And then this will summarize all of those into each of those lines. The column where it says EDI budget, all of those numbers will be feeding directly from your budget file. So those are tied together, which will help to make sure that the numbers are consistent across both worksheets. And so I'll walk you through an example of how to complete cash flow in case you haven't done it before. And then, of course, you're invited to connect with your EDI PM to go through if you need a little bit of help, need some clarification, want to talk through eligible expenses, that kind of thing. So I'm using very simple, small dollar amounts because I'm not great with numbers in front of a crowd, so this is really more for me. If you happen to find a property that costs $7, that sounds awesome, although I would really question why it would be so cheap. So just using as an example, acquisition, that's of course your purchase price, closing costs, all of those things that go into the purchase of property. Let's say you're using $7. Let's say for this past year, 2024, you've been using your existing award for capacity building, you've been working on your fundraising plan, developing your operational plan, maybe you started working with a couple of consultants, and let's say January, you execute a purchase and sale agreement with a property owner, with a seller, and you have a nice 90-day healthy feasibility period to complete all of your site due diligence, to go through your EDI contracting, because you probably know at this point it takes a bit of time to go through all of that. You're doing your site due diligence, and then you're ready to close in Q2. So let's say April 2025, you're closing, and now you've got site control. So that's where that $7 hits, and then you can see running across to those last two columns on the right side, it totals $7. And then that check column will just help you to see, okay, you're not projecting over or under. All right, so then the soft cost subtotal, that next row down, $16, let's say, is your budget for soft costs. This will include the myriad of consultants and other types of professional services and fees that would go into your project. Let's say I mentioned you're doing site due diligence before you close on your purchase. So your ALTA survey, your environmental studies, legal fees, all those kinds of things. At that point, maybe you've hired a development consultant or your architect. If you're planning on building a new building or doing a major renovation, you're having conversations with the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections about what's possible, what's allowable by building code and land use code on your site. And so then you can see you're starting to spend, 50 cents of your soft costs in Q1. Q2 starts ramping up. You've got site control, you hit the ground running, your architect and engineer are going through full speed ahead on design, you're going through the permitting process. Let's say by the end of 2025, your team has helped you to go through a competitive process to hire a contractor. Your contractor has filed with LNI, with the state, that they filed their intent to pay prevailing wages, and you are starting construction. So that's where you see where hard costs is essentially all your construction costs. So that's where you see that first dollar coming through in Q4. And then for 2026, starting Q1 all the way through Q4, that's spending down the rest of your construction costs, all the rest of your soft costs, and then also your FF&E costs as well towards the end of the project. And in case you're not really aware of that terminology, FF&E, that stands for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. It's kind of an industry standard term for lumping all of those things together. I would encourage you for that piece of it to have conversations with your EDI project manager to really help figure out what's going to be an eligible cost, because there's some nuance to that category, which you may have experienced with EDI or a lot of other public funding sources. There's kind of some differences and nuances with that. But again, just to reiterate, the main goal here is to see how you'll spend down over the course of 2 years. And then I'll also add, if you want to use these tools, save them down and modify them to, let's say you want to include your other funding sources, you want to see your cash flow just for yourselves. It's a helpful tool over the course of 2 years or the rest of your project, including your other funding sources. If you want to add different lines, I think you should feel free to do that, but we do ask that you use it in this format for when you're submitting for your request. So I'll pause there. I know this is new to a lot of folks. Any questions at this time or comments? All right. Okay.
I have a question. I might need to talk with the PM because we kind of have a unique situation where we own the building. It's an existing office space, but we don't know when our tenant is going to leave in order for us to demolish the building and start construction. So I'm not sure if we're ready to apply for capital, but I don't want to miss out on the opportunity to get the pre-development and construction funding that we need. So I don't know if is there a chance for flexibility for us?
Great question. I'm going to give it a go, and then we can see if there's anybody else who wants to answer the question. So I think for this funding round, it is really focused on where for projects, existing projects that do have that clarity, but we anticipate having a 2025 RFP. Of course, it's dependent on the budget deliberations that are happening now on council. But I think, you know, working with your project manager to scope out your timeline, you know, what supporting documents you have and some of the challenges I know in particular you're facing, that, you know, you like it might make sense to apply for the capacity building dollars so that you're ready for a 2025 capital ask. But I think, you know, we can't offer strategy, like application strategy, but I think what we can offer is, you know, support in understanding your timeline and your budget needs.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, let's go quickly to the next slide, and then we'll get to the rest of the questions. So in our, we have a bunch of links on our website. One of them, it takes you to the application portal. One is a Word version of the application, so you can, you know, start drafting things there and copying and pasting them into the portal. And then the last main one is our RFP guidance document, which walks through the evaluation and criteria with more granularity. And you'll see that we're only scoring 3 questions for this. The maximum point is 15 points each question. Each of the 3 scored questions are worth 5 points. And we have, I hope that we're giving strong guidance about what makes a strong response and what makes a weak response to these questions, and giving you examples of what we mean. And really our focus here is to help you, or to the scoring on all 3 of these questions is really focused on, you know, your ability to move the project through to the next milestone in the next 2 years, focusing your responses on that, so that we can evaluate, because that's our most important criteria this year. And I think the board helped us prioritize that, the projects that are moving into operations by 2026, those will be the highest priority. But and anybody who's moving into the next phase of development, if you're in the planning phase and you're moving into acquisition, we would count that as a major milestone in your project. And that would be, you know, if you're completing that by 2026, we would say that you would be an eligible, your project would be eligible this year. Next slide. Just want to leave you with the timeline on here again. November 19th at midnight, that's the date to note. And we're doing something a little bit different, but something you may have seen with other requests for proposals, which is that we'll be, you know, all the questions that you ask us, we will be anonymizing them to the best of our ability and providing the responses to everybody. On I think November 11th, November 7th, I can't remember exactly what the day. So that will be available online kind of as an FAQ as well. And I think that takes us to the end where we can answer all of your questions. The slides will be available on our website, and also the recording of the presentation will be available on the website, I'd say tomorrow or the next day. And Elisa, if you have a specific question, you know, feel free to ask your project manager, just me. But if you want to ask it here, you're also free to ask it now.
Well, if I want to first allow space for folks who have general questions, because I think that that's important for all of us, and it might even answer mine. And then if we have time before the meeting's up, I would love to ask during this time.
Great. Are there any general questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute.
And if you want us to go through any of the slides again, please feel free, especially since I sped run a couple of them a little too fast. So feel free to ask me to bring one back up.
I'd love to see the qualifying project slide.
While Dakota's pulling that up, the eligible project, there you go.
Sorry, was it this one or is it two before that?
There was one that looked a lot busier
Okay, let me go back.
than this one.
And now it doesn't want to let me go back. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Was it this one?
No, it's cool. That's great. It's all good. That one helped a lot too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Elisa, I think you're free to ask your question.
Awesome, thanks. My question, I'm pretty clear about the Columbia City Theater, and that project is definitely in the middle of things that we're working on. My question is for El Barrio, and would we be considered fully operational? We're currently working on the cultural space accessibility projects. Do I need to look and see if that was written into the original scope in order to qualify? Is it that specific? Or because it's an ongoing project? Yeah. So we're working on, we have half of the money we need for safety upgrades and accessibility for the South Park Hall. And I'd love to be able to apply for the other half.
Uh-huh. I think it's a really good question, because the funding, I think part of it is also like what funding you applied for, and we might need to have a conversation internally about this or check in with our board. But there are some applicants who came into acquisition only RFPs, and so the scope of your project as you applied would only be for acquisition, when we know that in order to deliver your project, there's a lot of other funding that's needed. So Lisa, let me circle back with the team, and I'll get back to you on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I don't think you're the only one who that impacts. So
I think there's if so in this scenario, if your application applied for acquisition and development, then you have two primary scope items, and your contract would have been written in a way to make the space operable. And to make the space operable, it would have to be accessible. So we can check for anyone who has a similar question, what the original scope was and what was actually awarded through your initial project award letter. And then if there is the make operable sort of element versus just the acquisition, it would likely be an allowable item.
Thank you.
And I'll just hop in. Thanks everyone for the presentation. I also want to thank a lot of the awardees. We missed the opportunity to offer any suggestions on the form or the survey. And so I just appreciate the fact that obviously our needs have been reflected. But for Nurturing Roots, similarly, we have an obvious change of scope. We definitely are probably going to be working within that threshold of operable, considering we don't have our old space, but we have a new space. We have to have all new development ideas and asks. So that kind of answered my question. Thanks for that, Jenna, on the end. But yeah, I'll just move along, but thanks, y'all.
And Michelle can follow up with you to look at the original application to kind of make sure before you pass or apply that we can make sure you have all the information you need, like what actually from our perspective. And I would encourage that of anyone who's thinking about what to ask for or not ask for. If you have any questions, let your project manager know. Sometimes it's actually more nuanced and on the wild world side of government speak, it actually would be allowable to us, and you might think not. So let us double check for you, and Michelle will reach out to you and make sure we can get you some clarification. And then also important to note that the 2025 RFP, which is dependent on the outcome of the budget process decision on November 21st, that the amount that we will have to run the entire program will be determined. And then from there, we work to figure out how much of that we can get out the door in grantee funding. And that would be an open RFP that would allow for scope expansion and new projects, proposals from new or existing grantees. So if you have a phase 2 of work that you've been waiting to do that's above and beyond what you originally requested, and we know the projects evolve, or if you actually are coming forward with a new project at a different location with a different scope, that would be a 2025 ask.
Okay, I do have one more question. When you mentioned on the budget that the capacity building would be an automatic award if you asked for, I'm trying to recall the page, but one of the slides, it just said that you would get capacity building funds. Do we have to, I guess, have an amount, or would you automatically receive the 150? Or do we designate an amount that we would request?
I think the maximum is 150, but if you're anticipating being complete by 2025, we would only give you the 75. But if you would be complete in 2026, we'd give you the 150.
I see.
Okay. We only need 30,000 more to pay our architect. Then, if you had a very specific amount that you needed, and you didn't want the 75, then you can also apply for that very specific amount. But no, it will be 75 or 150, depending on what your timeline is.
And so when we ask for, because for us, it's really development. And again, you said that would automatically go. So I guess I'm guessing there's a portion that we would be able to designate if we were to receive capacity funds. This is what we would need, but we're asking for development dollars.
Correct. Yeah. Put $1 in where it says, are you applying for a capacity dollar? But we just wanted to be clear that if you're applying, we wouldn't award you only for capital and not for capacity, because we know that's a critical piece of making your project successful.
Right on. Thank you.
I think the other scenario that some folks might face is that they have a current capacity award that they're spending or have not started spending. And so when you do your budget, if you have a current award balance at whatever level, indicate that so that we can see how far that part of the award will take you, and then what the gap is. So if the gap is really not until 2026 because you have a pool of unspent dollars, then you're looking at a need for additional capacity to carry you through the year of 2026, and that's where your ask lies. So we sort of say, think about where the gaps are, and you're asking for money to fill all your gaps and your holes to get you to the end of 2026. If you're uncertain, talk to your PM. If you get sort of late in the game and you feel like you're running out of time, ask for what you think you need. And if we have questions, we will resolve those as we evaluate. to make sure that we're not misinterpreting things. So if you get confused, ask for what you think you need, and we will make sure to resolve that in the evaluation based on your budget and the information you provide. And if we have additional questions, because something's unclear to us, we will reach out to resolve those. So we would prefer you err on the side of need over abundance of caution.
Great. If there aren't any other questions, we can wrap up the meeting. But again, thank you so much for being here and for being part of EDI. Thank you for getting your surveys um, uh, over the summer. And please reach out to your project manager or there's a general EDI email on the website if you have questions. We will try to be timely in our responses, and we'll be posting that FAQ in the first week of November. Thanks, everyone. Oh, is there something in the chat?
Just Dakota
I
is
just
sharing her general email address for this process.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.